Welcome to the part B of lecture 3, that is impacts of disaster, social, economic and environmental aspects. So without delay, I will continue the session. So the next one, second impact was health and psychological effects. So the second category of social impacts which covers the profound health and psychological consequences of disaster. So these impacts are often invisible in the immediate aftermath, but we can be among the most devastating and longest lasting. I'm repeating. So the second category of social impacts, they which covers the profound health and psychological consequences of a disaster. So what is that? The first one, the damage to the hospitals and healthcare facilities. One of the cruelest paradoxes of disasters is that they strike medical infrastructure at the very moment when it is needed the most. The most of the hospitals, clinics, and all healthcare centers are damaged or destroyed. For example, in the 2015 Nepal earthquake, nearly 30% of the country's health facilities were damaged. This meant that at the moment of maximum medical need, with thousands of injured survivors, the health system has collapsed. In India also, the 2004 tsunami, the damaged or we can say damaged or destroyed hundreds of the primary health centers along the Tamil Nadu and both Andhra Pradesh coastal region. The emergency surgeries, the maternal care, and the routine medical services all are disrupted for nearly months. The second one, very limited access to emergency medical care. The second point was very limited access to emergency medical care. So even the hospital survive. See, maybe the hospital is there, hospital is open. But what about the roads and bridges which connecting to that community to that hospital? So even though hospitals were survived, the roads and bridges may be destroyed, making it impossible for injured survivors to reach the medical care. In hilly and remote areas like the Uttarakhand hills during the 2013 Kedarnath disaster, the landslides blocked all the roads and cut off entire villages for nearly days and weeks. So survivors with serious injuries who cannot reach the care within the first 24 to 48 hours, they face dramatically higher mortality rates. So this is what disaster medical professional call the golden hour, the critical window for life-saving intervention. The first 24 to 48 hours is a golden hour. So if you can't reach within 24 to 48 hours, then your mortality rate will be increased. And the third one we discussed already, the outbreaks of diseases due to poor sanitation and contaminated water. So after a major flood or cyclone, the sewage systems overflow and mix with the drinking water sources. All the dead animals and human remains contaminate rivers and groundwater. As a result, this is a rapid outbreak of waterborne diseases, which is cholera, typhoid, dengue, hepatitis, all vector-borne diseases like malaria and dengue also surge after floods as a stagnant water creates breeding grounds for mosquitoes. So, India's flood-prone states like Bihar, Assam, and West Bengal, they experiences disease outbreaks almost every monsoon season following all the major floods. So, public health surveillance and rapid responses are very critical in the weeks of following a disaster to prevent these secondary health impacts from claiming more lives than the disaster itself. See, after disaster only many people lost their lives. But all the government agencies, NDMA, SDMA, all national district level agencies, they consider only deaths during the disaster period. And the fourth one, very few people were discussing, that is increase in malnutrition, especially among the children. When food supply chains are disrupted and agricultural production is destroyed, the food insecurity sets very rapidly. So the malnutrition rises particularly very sharply among the children under 5 years whose developing bodies are very most vulnerable. The acute malnutrition weakens the immune system, making the children far more susceptible to infectious diseases. Even though after 5 years, the kids for lifelong they're susceptible to all kind of infectious diseases. In prolonged post-disaster situations, such as after the 2010 Pakistan flood, which nearly affected 20 million people, 20 million people, nearly 2 crores. The malnutrition among children becomes a major cause for mortality in the months of following the disaster. So the next one, the psychological trauma, anxiety and PTSD, post tension, stress disorder. The psychological impacts of disasters are profound and often invisible. The survivors who have witnessed the death of their loved ones, the people very close to them, the destruction of their homes or their own near-death experiences, they frequently develop PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Usually we call it as PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. The PTSD is characterized by flashbacks, the nightmares, the severe anxiety, the depression, and an inability to function in daily life. The children are especially vulnerable to psychological trauma even after the disasters. The studies of child survivors of the 2004 tsunami in Tamil Nadu showed that a large number of children developed PTSD, the anxiety disorders, and depression. So many experienced nightmares about water and waves for years after the event also. So the final one, the long-term mental health issues often go untreated. Despite the enormous scale of psychological suffering after disasters, the mental health is almost always the last priority in relief and rehabilitation programs. The physical reconstruction receives the most attention and funding. The mental health support, which includes the counseling, the therapies, community healing programs, is routinely underfunded and underdelivered. The result is that the vast number of disaster survivors carry unaddressed psychological trauma for many years, sometimes to decades. This affects their ability to work, to parent, to participate in community life, and to rebuild their lives. So it is hidden epidemic within every disaster, right? So coming to the next slide, go through this slide. 30 seconds. So the third area of social impact that we will examine is the disruption of education. This is a particularly important topic in the Indian context where the right to education is en- um, enriched in law and where educational attainment is one of the most powerful pathways out of poverty. From the source, so here I already mentioned the source. From the source, it is cited on this slide is a 2015 report. The title: Education Disrupted, Disaster Impacts on Education in the Asia Pacific region. So a comprehensive study that is documented the educational consequences of disasters across multiple countries including India, Nepal, Bangladesh, the Philippines and the Pakistan. So the findings are striking and very deeply concerning. The first one, schools and colleges destroyed are they used as relief centers. So when a disaster strikes, all the school buildings are among the first structures to be used as relief shelters because they belong to the government, because they are typically large and they're publicly accessible and always available. There is no ownership. This decision saves lives of the short term but creates serious long term consequences in the educational point of view. The schools remain occupied by displaced families for weeks, sometimes for months, during which no classes can be held. Additionally, in poorly constructed areas, school buildings themselves are often destroyed. So, in the 2005 Kashmir earthquake, over 7,000 school buildings were damaged. Tens of thousands of children had no school to return. So, in the 2015 Nepal earthquake, also, over nearly 32,000 classrooms were destroyed. So the second one is interruption to children's learning and academic year. When schools are destroyed or occupied, the academic year is interrupted. The India school system, an interruption of even a few months has serious consequences. They missed examinations, they have gaps in syllabus coverages, and loss of structured learning environment that children depending on are for cognitive and social development. Especially for children sitting on board examinations, this disruption can make full lost year of education. The third one, increased dropout rates due to relocation or economical hardship. After a disaster, many families are forced to relocate either to temporary shelters in another year or to live in a distant towns or cities for permanent. When this happens, children are uprooted from their schools and their peer groups. In many cases, they do not re-enroll in a school because this is particularly true for especially girls who face additional social and safety concerns in relief camp environments. And one more point, the economic hardships after a disaster also drives schools dropouts. When parents lose their income, the elder ones, especially boys in rural India, are pulled out of the school to work and contribute to the family income. So these children may never return to the formal education. And next one, lack of educational material and qualified teachers post disaster. Even when schools reopen, the quality of education drops very sharply. The textbooks, notebooks, laboratory equipments, and computers, everything was destroyed. Teachers may themselves be displaced, traumatized, or occupy their own family crisis. Temporary learning spaces under tents or damaged buildings are not conducive to effective teaching or learning. They may be reopened the schools, but not in a proper way. And the final one, long-term impact on skill development and employment opportunities. This is perhaps the most serious consequence of an educational disruption. A child who misses 2 years of schools due to disaster does not simply lose 2 years of learning. They lost the cognitive, social, technical skills that those 2 years they have built. This has lifelong consequence for their employability, earning potentiality, and ability to participate fully in the society. See, when we talk about disasters as development setbacks, the educational impact is one of the clearest and most measurable examples. Decades of investment in enrollment and school construction can be wiped out in a single disaster event. Next one, the fourth social impact, that is vulnerability and social inequality. So we discussed already, so I don't want to waste your time. So here the main discussion is about disproportionate impact on marginalized groups. We discussed increased poverty and employment after post disaster. There is a rise in gender based violence, human trafficking and exploitation in shelters. And the fourth one is deepening of social inequalities and exclusion. And finally, the main point in Indian context, they weakened the trust on government and institutions due to inadequate responses during the disaster time. Okay, so I discussed already, so I don't want to waste time on this slide. So I'll go with the next slide. Okay, with this, all four major impacts associated with the social is already discussed. Now coming to the second one, the economical impact. So economical impact also we discussed briefly. So now I explained all the economical impacts in detail. So in that one, the first impact. So now we move to the second category, the major second category, that the economic impacts of disaster. So these economic impacts are often the most extensively measured and reported aspects of disasters because they translate into quantifiable monetary losses. Because money is visible. So all news channels, the central reports, everything they're talking about the economical aspects only. But as we will see, the economic impacts of disasters are much broader and more complex than simply the cost of rebuilding damaged structures. So now we discussed in detail, the first and most visible economical impact is the destruction of infrastructure and property. Okay. Please go through the points for 30 seconds. So I'll continue. The first one is about destruction, second one is about commercial buildings. Please go through it. Okay, shall we start? So the first one is destruction of critical infrastructure. So what is a critical infrastructure? This critical infrastructure refers to the systems and assets that are essential for the functioning of a community or as a society. That means the roads, bridges, the airports, railways, power grids, the water supply systems, all telecommunication networks, these all we consider as a society. So this infrastructure is essential for all these uh, functioning of a society. When these are destroyed or severely damaged, the entire economy of the affected region grinds to a halt. So consider what happened when road and bridges are destroyed. Goods cannot be transported. So the best example is nearly from last 1 2 months because of the Suez Canal issue. So all majority countries were shortage of fuel and shortage of food grains, right? So when these roads and bridges are destroyed, goods cannot be transported, food and medicines cannot reach affected communities, workers cannot go to their jobs, emergency responders cannot reach disaster victims. The cost of repairing a single major bridge can run into hundreds of crores, and during the months or years it takes to rebuild, the economy continues to suffer. Right. So second one, in this one only, the main point very few people are discussing the damage to the power grids. The power grid damage has cascading effects, that means amplifying effects across all sectors. See, if you consider hospitals, they cannot function without electricity. The water treatment plants cannot operate. The manufacturing plants will be shut down. The cold storage for food fails, they're leading to spoils. So every day of power shortage after a disaster multiplies economic losses across the entire affected community. So people are only talking about infrastructure, what about the power grid? So India's experience with the 2013 Uttarakhand floods illustrate this vividly. Roads across the Uttarakhand hills were washed away, cutting off not just disaster affected villages but also the entire pilgrimage circuit, Chardham Yatra, which is the economical backbone of that region. The economic losses was in thousands of crores in 2013 only. Coming to the second point, that is residential and commercial buildings severely damaged and destroyed. So the destruction of homes and commercial buildings represents an enormous direct economic loss to individuals, right? All commercial buildings, that is communities and governments. So rebuilding a home for a family that has lost everything costs hundreds to thousands of rupees and must come from somewhere, whether the government aid or insurance or loans or personal savings. For most poor families, rebuilding is financially devastating even with the aid of government. All commercial buildings which is shops, warehouses, factories, hotels, they represent not just the physical structure but also the livelihoods of everyone who works in them. When these are destroyed, the economic activity they represent, it disappears, sometimes permanently. And the third one, the public utilities like electricity, we discussed already, water supply, communication systems are disrupted, affecting both citizens as well as business. And the final one, the cost of rebuilding can drain national and local budgets and take years to restore fully. So coming to the next slide, um, so there is a small, and please go through it for 30 seconds. Okay. So here I'll explain all the points with one example. The first one is small and medium enterprises suffer irreversible losses. See, studies after 2001 Bhuj earthquake found that a significant proportion of small businesses in that affected area never reopened. The owners did not have the capital money to rebuild, could not secure any loans, and eventually they migrated to other areas. This permanent loss of small enterprises which weakens the local economies for years. And the second one is manufacturing units face destruction of machinery, the inventory loss, and long-term shutdowns. So here also you can see large manufacturing facilities which represents enormous capital investment in machinery, equipment, raw materials, and finished inventory. So when a flood or earthquake destroys a factory, not only the physical building, but sophisticated machinery also worth crores of rupees may be destroyed. So the raw materials and finished products, everything was damaged, right? The insurance claims process is often slow and sometimes it is contagious, meaning factories may remain idle for months while disputes were resolved. So many factories also shut down after the disasters. So next one is it is related to tourism dependent regions experience severe losses as we discussed already. The 2013 Uttarakhand floods devastated the pilgrimage tourism industry. The hotel occupancy in the region dropped by nearly 80% in the next following season. So the recovery of a tourism, it will take several years still that recovery is not 100%. And the final one, the supply chains both local and global are interrupted leading to shortage and inflation. We discussed already. So we'll quickly move on to the next slide. Yeah. Here, the third area of economic impact is the damage to the agriculture and rural economy. Because you know India is mainly depending upon the rural. The rural population is very high in India. So this is particularly very critical in Indian context, where agriculture employs approximately 40 to 45% of the workforce, and where the large proportion of the rural population lives very close to the substance means they have very little buffer against sudden income loss. So there is a more chances of sudden income loss to the farmers. The first one, the disasters may destroy crops. Disasters like floods, droughts, and cyclones, they destroy crops. They destroy the irrigation systems and the stored gains. Right. So irrigation infrastructure means the canals, check dams, pump sets, and all field channels. They're expensive to rebuild and even more expensive to see. For building only, it will take a lot of money. For rebuilding, even it will cause even more expenses. So when irrigation systems are destroyed, farmers may be unable to cultivate even in the seasons following the disaster. After that, also they cannot. Um, Again, they'll not continuing the agriculture. See, and then next main point, the stored grains and food stocks, which represents both the family's food security for the coming months and their seed stock for the next planting season. Everything was destroyed by floods and cyclones. So leading the seed stock, that means see some people they're storing the rice grains for the next 6 months. So what happens if suddenly flood occurs? Yeah, so according to the reports by the Food and Agriculture Organization, the United Nations, between 2008 to 2018, agriculture absorbed approximately 26% of all economic losses from natural disasters in all developing countries. For India, this figure is likely to high given the proportion of the population engaged in farming. The United Nations they give. And next one, the farmers, the food shortage may lead to the price hikes, obviously, which affecting the affordability for consumers. There is a certain prices hike in the prices, so everybody cannot afford. And the farmers or rural workers may fall into debts due to loss of income and rebuilding costs. We discussed already. So next one. Next one is about the job losses and income disruption. So millions of people they lost their jobs, especially in informal sectors and daily wage labor. See, daily wage laborers every day they have to go to work. If they will get any job on the day, then only they can feed their family. If they don't have any work, then how they will feed their family? So there is one major issue. Without there is no job to do. So from daily wage laborers, from where they will get the job? So second one, the reduced business activity leads to layoffs and wage cuts. Obviously, there is no requirement of more number of employees. They may obviously they lay off, and otherwise they may cut the wages. Then suddenly family income drops sharply, which affecting the living standards, and the many families they come under below poverty line. And then there is a sudden increment of unemployment rates, which leading to migration and social sustainability. All these are fourth outcome of economic impact. And the final one, fiscal burden on government. So this one, see, government has to must allocate budgets for emergency relief, rescue operations, and long-term rehabilitation. So it is very burden for the government. Next one, the funds meant for development, for especially education, infrastructure, and healthcare, they're mainly diverting to disaster management. See, maybe the government has fund for to improve the education, infrastructure, and healthcare sector. Now there is a sudden disaster, so they diverted all the funds to the disaster management because that day how government is managing is the main point. Next one, the economic growth slows down due to the damaged assets and lost the productivity. And the final one, the national debt. As a country, our debt may rise and we'll go to the other countries and we borrow the fund to recovery efforts. So it was very fiscal burden on governments. Now coming to the environmental impacts. So environmental impacts we already discussed. See here, uh, as a disaster impacts, people are mainly talking about environmental already. So very few people only mainly concentrated on social. That's why I have emphasized uh, the main impacts on social category. No environmental, you know already. So I'll quickly complete this environmental impacts of a disaster. See, the natural disasters like wildfires. See, wildfires. There is a why I'm calling here natural disaster. I'll explain in the coming classes. Because wildfire is considered both natural disaster as well as man-made disaster. Also, when we consider it as a natural disaster, when we consider wildfire as a man-made disaster, we will discuss in the coming classes. So the natural disasters like wildfires, floods, and tsunamis, they destroy forests, they destroy wetlands. The coral reefs means the aquaculture, aqua animals were living inside the water, and then it destroy the grasslands, right? So the first environmental impact is the destruction of ecosystem. All these wetlands, trees, forests, coral reefs, grasslands, everything is part of ecosystem. So an ecosystem is a complex web of living organisms, which includes both plants, animals, insects, and even microorganisms. Right? So ecosystem provides what scientists call ecosystem services. See, without uh, other living organisms, even humankind cannot survive. These natural disasters destroy forests. And the second one is loss of habitat leads to wildlife population decline and extinction. I'm repeating, loss of habitat for wildlife leads to population decline and extinction of vulnerable species. I'll explain this point because many people don't understand how it is affecting humans. I'll explain. So when natural habitats are destroyed, the plants and animals that depending upon those habitats lose their homes. Many species, particularly those with limited geographic range or specialized habitat requirements, they decline very rapidly. Bengal tigers, example Bengal tigers. So the loss of even a single species can have cascading effects through the food chain and ecosystem. So all humans, organisms, microorganisms, animals, trees, everything we are in food circle. So in India, the flooding of forest areas in Kaziranga National Park, the home of one-horned rhinos during annual monsoon floods, causes significant wildlife mortality every year. The climate change is making these floods more frequent and more severe, putting iconic and endangered species under increasing pressure. So that national park is the these cascading effects are multiplied every year after that. And the final one, there is a disruption of biodiversity, affect the balance of ecosystem and food chain. So coming to the next slide, that is water pollution and scarcity. So floods and industrial accidents can contaminate all the river water, lake water, sometimes groundwater with the sewage, the chemicals and debris. So you know what? How much water is available to mankind? Can you guess, anyone? Out of 100%, nearly 0.01% is only available for drinking purpose. Out of 100%, 70% is the seawater, salt water you cannot use. Out of 30, nearly 27 to 28% is glaciers. Out of 2 to 3%, um, the groundwater, all those things. So the proper drinking water available to humankind was 0.01%. So that 0.01% also the contaminated, it is in rivers, lakes and groundwater. So because of the disasters, we are polluting all floods and industrial accidents will contaminate all these 0.01% water also. And then there is a oil spillages and chemical leaks. These all are comes under man-made disasters. They severely impact marine and coastal environments. And the complete contrast. In droughts, the water sources dry up, reducing access to clean drinking water, and which is very harming the aquatic life. So next one, and there is one more impact called soil erosion and land degradation. So landslides, floods, and deforestation during the disasters, they wash away all the topsoil, which leading to the loss of all fertile land. So the top layer is fertile land only because of these floods and landslides, all is washing out as a erosion, right? And second one, the earthquakes and mining related disasters, they destabilize land, which causing long-term soil infertility. I'm repeating, the earthquakes and mining disasters destabilize the land. How? The earthquakes cause ground deformation, and there is one concept called soil liquefaction. If possible, I'll explain in pos- uh, following classes. Soil liquefaction, which is directly related to civil engineering, and the slope instability. These all are render land permanently unsuitable for construction or agriculture. Especially in liquefaction, this actually liquefaction is a phenomena that occurs when saturated sandy soils are shaken by an earthquakes. The ground temporarily behave like a liquid, which causing building to sink and tilt. So even after the earthquake, these soils remain structurally compromised. And what about mining related disasters? The subsidence, tiling, dam failures, and underground collapses, these also cause severe and often irreversible land degradation. The best example, the 2019 Brumadinho tilings dam failure in Brazil released millions of cubic meters of iron ore mining waste, so burying entire communities and contaminating hundreds of kilometers of river system. So this land affected may never be restored to productive use. And the third one, agricultural land becomes unstable, which is affecting the food production, and especially if there is no food production, then it will be definitely affecting the local livelihoods. Final one, air pollution and climatic effects. So the wildfires releases large quantities of carbon dioxide, methane, all chlorofluorocarbons. So we are usually measured in CO2 equivalent. What is that? CO2 equivalent? Carbon footprint that we discussed in sustainability subject. So and these wildfires releases all carbon footprint into the all other greenhouse gases they released into the air. So volcanic eruptions, every time volcanic eruptions, they emit ash and toxic gases, which is affecting air quality and contributing to the global cooling in some cases. And the third one, the industrial fires and chemical spillages, they release harmful pollutants. They are causing respiratory problems and damaging the ozone layer. So these all are comes under air pollution. And the final one, the waste accumulation and toxic hazards. You can see during the disasters, they generate large amounts of debris, hazardous waste, and non-biodegradable materials. Non-biodegradable means like plastic. They won't degradable into the soil. And also improper disposal of disaster waste, which leads to environmental contamination and health hazards, especially landfills. Also, the post-disaster waste often overwhelms local waste management systems, leading to pollution in air, water, and soil. I'm repeating the third one. See, there is a sudden influx of enormous quantities of waste after disaster, which overwhelms local waste management system. Like, see, there is a landfill rich capacity. The collection of vehicles are insufficient. Sorting and processing facilities cannot handle by the volume. The result is what? Waste accumulates in the environment, in rivers, on roadsides, in open dumps. They're creating ongoing pollution long after the disaster itself has receded. So proper disaster waste management requires they need planning, pre-designing temporary debris storage sites, but these all are not possible. So this is also comes under environmental impacts. So with this, so you may ask about then where is the health. So if you go through my video, previous video, that health also I explained under social impacts only. So with this, I just want to conclude. So I hope this session was excellent. We have now covered a great deal of ground in today's lecture. So now we'll Today's lecture covers the impacts of disasters across three major categories: social, and health is inter the subcategory of social, economic, and environmental. So now I'll just briefly explain key points under each one. So that is social one. And the social impacts, we covered four major areas: that is loss of life and displacement, including death, injuries, forced migration, the family separation, community network disruption, and overcrowding in relief campuses. The second point is the health and psychological effects, which including damage to the healthcare infrastructure. There is a possibility of disease outbreaks, the malnutrition, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and the chronic underfunding of mental health support after disasters. And the third one, disruption of education, which includes destruction of school buildings, interruption of the academic year, increased dropout rates, and long-term consequences for skill development and employment. And the fourth impact is vulnerability and social inequality, which discussed about the disproportionate impact on women, the children, the elderly people, the disabled people, and the poor one. And finally, the rise of gender-based violence in camps, the deepening of social inequality, and the erosion of public trust on the government. These all are comes under social impacts. And the second one, what we discussed, that is economical impacts. So under economic impacts, we covered five areas. That is infrastructure and property damage, right? The infrastructure and the property damage, disruption of business and industry, agriculture and rural economic losses, so job losses and income disruption, and finally fiscal burden on government. These all we discussed under economical impacts. And the next one is environmental impacts. So we discussed about destruction of ecosystems, and then water pollution and scarcity, then soil erosion and land degradation, and the fourth one, air pollution and climatic effects. The fifth one and final one, waste accumulation and toxic hazards. Right? So this comprehensive picture of disaster, which impact should make clear why disaster management is not a peripheral concern. It is central to economical development, social justice, and environmental sustainability. So disasters are not just natural events; they are developmental challenges that require integrated and multidisciplinary responses. So with this, so that brings us the end of the lecture 3, part B. So lecture 3 also I covered in two parts, part A and part B. I hope today's this session has also given you deep and comprehensive understanding of how disaster impacts societies in three pillars: social, economical, and environmental, and why these impacts matter for everyone who works in engineering, public policies, and this disaster management. See, let me leave you with one thought to carry forward. Every one of the impacts we studied today, that is the displacement, the disease outbreak, the crop losses, the soil erosion, the toxic waste, everything is preventable. I'm repeating, the displacement you can prevent, the disease outbreak you can prevent, the crop losses, the soil erosion, the toxic waste, everything is preventable or at least reducible. You can reduce the extent through good planning and proactive disaster risk management. So you may not deal with the mental trauma, at least with the proactive disaster management risk, you can either preventable or you can reduce the intensity. So the goal of this course is to equip you the knowledge and tools to make that prevention happen, right? So in our next lecture, that is lecture 4, we will study about how we prevent and mitigate this disaster management. So we'll study about the prevention and mitigation strategies. So what specific actions can be taken by the government and by the engineers, by the communities, and by the individuals to reduce the likelihood and severity of disaster impacts. So this is what we move from understanding the problem to designing the solution. So till first 3 lectures we understood the problem. Now we'll design the solution, and that is where your engineering expertise becomes most directly relevant. So my request was, please review today's notes before going through the fourth lecture. Think about one specific disaster impact from today's lecture that you feel is particularly important to address, and come prepared to discuss why in the comment section. So I'm glad to go through those comments. For any questions, read out to me to my mail ID nmb560@gmail.com. Thank you all very much, and I will see you in the next class. Thank you.